Well, Dr. Charlie, it is such a pleasure to have you on the Sakara Life podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Glad to be here.
We like to start every podcast with the same question, which is, what is your mission here on Earth?
Wow. What a way to start a podcast.
We started light.
Right there. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, I think my mission is to show people that there's, frequency medicine and functional medicine together combined is some of the best healthcare that you can receive, honestly. And that one of the things that I've pivoted to, honestly, is that I call it the perception of knowledge, that there's so much information thrown out there and so much knowledge thrown out there that can really get scary because there's a lot of things we have to heal from. But your perception is you have to control the controllables and do really small action steps every day to make a big change in your life and in your health. And so I think that's becoming more of my purpose, where it originally started off on showing people that there's this thing called frequency medicine that can give you and your loved ones the best care possible on the planet. People just don't know that it exists.
And I have to say, you're a very good teacher. Like, it's definitely a gift of yours. And here at Sakara, we talk about our mission is to really create this toolkit for people, because for both me and Whitney, the scariest part is when you don't feel well and you don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so we always say Sakara, can be your toolkit. You can use it when you're feeling great, to stay feeling great, or you can use it when you're really in this reckoning moment and don't know what to do next. And I really appreciate your platform as well, because I think it's similar in that you give people the tools, which in your case is really the knowledge. And it's not just like, hey, try this. It's really in-depth knowledge about how your body works and why something like functional medicine works and why frequency medicine works and what supplements do, et cetera. So I really appreciate the detail you go into.
I love it.
Can you talk about what frequency medicine is for those people that might not know?
Yeah. So frequency medicine can be practiced like a million different ways, honestly. Everyone has their own little flavor to them, so to speak. But in a nutshell, it is using frequencies of whether it's a pathogen, any type of toxin. You can test things that are good for you, like certain foods. And you're just asking the nervous system, can you adapt to this, or is your body not adapting to it? So it really gives you a clinical picture of the roadblocks that are priorities for you, essentially. And so some people use machines to do it. People like me, I use things called hand modes and vial testing. A lot of people in the frequency med world use vial testing. And really what that is it looks like they're like little perfume sample. That's how I always tell people. It's like these little perfume samplers that you can get from a department store that hold a little liquid in there. And the liquid is water. And water can hold a frequency and a charge, as we all know. And so people have found ways to implement or imprint really the frequency of whatever you want to test against the body's nervous system. So, we're going to be talking on here about immune system and parasites. You can test things like that. You can test foods, you can test metals, chemicals, you can test emotions. Even emotions obviously carry frequency. And it's really, the sky's the limit. It's whatever way that you want to take it. Again, back to everyone has their own flavors. So what do you want to test people for, and in what way do you want to test it, essentially? So it can mean so many different things, but in the nutshell, I would say that it is a way to ask the nervous system what it's adapting to. And if it's not adapting, what helps the body adapt to that.
And when you say there's also machines to test it, what are those machines? Are those like bioresonance machines?
Yep. Yeah, different types of bioresonance machines that can use like saliva samples, can use hair samples, nail samples, because those hold the frequency of you. And as we grow our hair out, our nails out, and our internal system, so to speak, changes, our fingernails, our hair will carry different frequencies. And so you can do it one day and then 6 months later do it again. You'll find something totally different because you're not in the same stage of life as you were 6 months prior.
And talk to me about the kind of practitioner that can practice frequency medicine.
Yeah.
Like who is that, and what kind of training is it?
So it can be anybody, honestly. I'm a chiropractor. I have friends who are medical doctors who do it, acupuncturists, naturopaths, functional med practitioners. I'd say since 2020, it's been way more in the light, so to speak, where people who have been doing functional medicine and have a health certification found frequency medicine, and they go and start taking the seminars. And it is all seminar based. Like when I was in chiro school, I learned about it my first year in at an outside seminar, essentially. And so I was at every weekend taking a seminar. I mean, when I say that I was buried in books and in rooms with doctors from around the world, and I'm sitting in the back just soaking up all this information, it was every single weekend. My friends were like, at the time, they're like, what do you do with your life? You're in chiro school, you have to study for midterms, you have to do finals. It's a rigorous program of 25 credit hours plus each time. And I'm like, honestly, the first treatment I ever got with frequency medicine, it was a light bulb moment in my life where I'm like, this is what I need to provide to the world. And I need to learn whatever it is that I can to help every person that I come in contact with. And so it really can be anybody who has some type of health certification. Most times that tends to be chiropractors, just because they're so trained in the nervous system that it's kind of, I don't want to say it's the exact same as what's taught in school, because it's not, but it's a very easy transition into realizing how powerful the human body is.
And if somebody were looking for a practitioner that practices this, like, are they searching for frequency medicine practitioner, or how would they find out about people who do this?
Each technique usually has a website with a practitioner locator. But if you don't know the techniques, then you would probably more so look into muscle testing. I feel like muscle testing is the universal buzzword in frequency medicine, if you will. And then on my Instagram and in my membership, I have an ongoing PDF that we just created that in each state, and sometimes other countries, people who I personally know who practice somewhat mostly similar to me, but everyone again has their own flavors. I have like a directory of everyone. And so that will keep growing as I meet new people and people take seminars. And so that's the best way that I know of right now.
And can you talk about what the experience is like as a patient in frequency medicine? Like I take my kids, but I think people might have a hard time understanding like what the actual experience is. Like, what do you do with the vials and et cetera? And how do you get answers?
Yeah. So, there's people who use muscle testing. I'm going to speak to that because that's what I do. And so you would go to a practitioner and you basically, it looks kind of like a strength contest, even though it's really not. Because, we test kids. Obviously, as adults, we're going to be much stronger than kids. But what it is it's a question you're asking the nervous system of muscle tone. The best way to tap into the nervous system is through muscle tone, right? As we get older, if we get neurological stuff, what happens? Our muscle tone withers away. And so you can use that same concept to see, does the muscle, as you're muscle testing against whatever you want to test, does the muscle lock? Or does it not lock? And if it doesn't lock, it means the body's not adapting to whatever stressor you're putting on the system. And the vial is, like I said, a little perfume-looking vial. You can put it on the chest. You can put it over certain organ reflex points. You can put it over, if you want to scan the teeth. I mean, it's really, you can scan it anywhere. And so, again, it's a hard question to answer because everyone's a little different. You might go to your practitioner.
And you have to also just experience it sometimes too.
You have to. Everyone has a different experience because everybody's a biochemical individual. And so, for instance, someone might come in and their main thing is an emotional trauma. Well, that person's treatment's going to look a whole lot different than if someone comes in and their priority is Lyme issues. My mentor, Dr. Versendahl, would always say there's so many different ways of practicing frequency medicine. There's so many different ways of treating the human body, but there's only one correct way, and that's the body's way of the specific body in front of you.
So true. I think the reason we wanted to cover the immune system with you today is because I like the way you frame it. You frame and why it's so important. Like, I think the immune system is, what's the word I want? It's not like a hype word, but it's kind of like, boost your immune system. I feel like it's kind of an afterthought in health. It's like take some vitamin C, but you really talk about how an affront to the immune system, so like an infection, whether it's a viral infection or a parasitic infection, is the root cause of so many things. And those root causes tend to get missed by so much of conventional medicine. So I know this is a really big question, but in your own way, can you kind of explain what the immune system is? Because I also think people don't actually really know, because it's not like the liver, it's not even like the nervous system where you can just kind of like see it and understand it intuitively. What is it? And how does something like an infection mean it's a root cause via the immune system?
It's a great question. We can probably do like 10 podcasts on this question. But I would say, like, in a nutshell, I look at the immune system as more of like, what's our protector? It's protecting our body. It's made up of many organs, right? They all function, the whole body functions together. So the nervous system and the immune system, the cardiovascular system, they're all in communication 24/7. And that's why we talk a lot about balance. And so I would say the immune system is to protect us from environmental toxicity. And it's also to balance our inflammatory levels, right? Levels of inflammation, which then that's a whole nother can of worms of, what causes inflammation. Because a lot of times, and you'll see this on social media, is we throw the baby out with the bathwater on a lot of buzzwords, right? So we have, like, an example is inflammation. It's like, hey, we have to reduce inflammation. And it's like, okay, that's a great idea for most people because most people are chronically inflamed. But if we didn't have inflammation, then our immune system isn't working properly and we can't heal. Like, inflammation is a process of healing. And, it's supposed to be acute, but if it's prolonged inflammation, now it starts breaking us down. And so when we say inflammation, we really mean that prolonged, but we don't really say that too often. And so now everyone's like, oh, well, I have to have zero inflammation. It's like, well, then you wouldn't survive. It's impossible. Cortisol is another big one like that. And estrogen's another big one like that, right? It's like, everyone knows cortisol and everyone will look at cortisol as like the devil, but cortisol is what, helps get our immune system in check, right? It actually makes our immune system work properly, but it's when it's overly stimulated and overly secreted, now we are in a state of breakdown, similar to estrogen. A lot of issues are due to xenoestrogens and toxic estrogen, but we got to remember that, right? Good estrogen is so dang important for our systems, whether you're male or female. It does not matter. We all need a healthy level of our hormones. Obviously, estrogen and progesterone a lot more important for females. Testosterone a lot more important for males in general. But both genders need all of it. Like, we need that specific balance, and so. I know I got off on a tangent. Your question was the immune system. Well, it's all
connected, right?
It is. It is absolutely all connected. And your one question was, or one thing you said was that, we want to boost the immune system. And it's like, okay, that's a good place to start. So do we want to boost an immune system that's doing its job, that's overstimulated because there is a toxin there? And the one thing that you'll hear a lot of people say is toxicity creates deficiencies. And that is so true. Like, you mentioned vitamin C. Okay, so let's just give this scenario. Maybe this will make it land for people. Vitamin C is great. We need it. It's absolutely a crucial antioxidant. It helps us make cortisol, okay? But what if we're pumping the body full of vitamin C when we have a low-level viral infection that's constantly making our body secrete cortisol to stimulate our immune system? Why would we keep, and cortisol is or vitamin C is what's used to make cortisol. So maybe our low vitamin C levels are due to our constant stimulation of cortisol, which is due to a virus that is low level that no one has found yet. So the one of the biggest things that I've done on social media, especially why I started social media, is to bring these concepts of like, hey, this is, different than what your main influencers are talking about, because there's a lot of health influencers. The reason why I didn't do social media is because so many patients would bring in what their favorite influencers were talking about, and I wasn't finding that it was muscle testing on them or frequency testing. And so I never wanted to be thought of as a health influencer. And so that's where, the membership, and we can talk more about that later, really has been, it's given birth to that. But that's kind of it in a nutshell of like, let's critically think a little bit deeper and take a step back, look at a bird's eye view of, we don't have to be rocket scientists to understand that maybe there's deficiencies in the body because there's an inflammatory process in the body that's prolonged, that's due to an infection. And we are, and I'm sure you guys have talked about this a ton, we are basically skin that surrounds a bunch of microbiome. We are. Yeah, and so it's like, how can you not see that if that is off because there's toxic bacteria or viruses, parasites, or fungus, how can you not see that can cause the majority of our issues as a society? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I've heard you talk about how there's like, your theory is there's a microbiome kind of each organ system.
Yep.
So like the liver has its own microbiome, the nervous system might have its own. What does that mean? And what do those microbes, like what's the role they play in the immune system?
Man, we got to do like 10 of these episodes.
Okay.
So really what they do is they are keeping everything in check. I would say they're like the security guards. Like they're the security guards of our prisons. And so they keep everything in check. They do so much at the chemical level that it is impossible to cover all of it. But I will say that they basically sample all of the toxins that we are exposed to, and then they get the immune system to do its job, and that is to protect us. And so when we think about microbiomes, let's think about our barrier systems, like our lung barrier, our blood-brain barrier, our gut barrier. They really just protect us from environmental toxins and then keep us regulated, right? Like our gut microbiome is the fine tuner of our mitochondria. And that is like infinite, like that is infinite importance.
And can you talk about germ theory versus terrain theory and kind of how that plays into the immune system? So like this idea of germ theory, like there's a virus, someone coughs in a room, a certain amount of people get it because that virus travels, versus terrain theory, meaning it's more based on your own kind of terrain, your own health, your own systems. Can you kind of explain that in more detail and what that means for the immune system?
So I love this question because a lot of people are going to disagree with me. And why I say that is because people are like, well, you're either germ theory or terrain theory. And I'm like right in the middle. So terrain theory is, how good is your tissues? Do you have heavy metals? Do you have too much EMF in you? Do you have a ton of plastics and chemicals in you, which basically breaks down your system over time? And then it gives these bugs like parasites and bacteria a chance to grow. And their argument is that these pathogens are opportunistic, so they need an opportunity to flourish. And I 100% agree with that. But with frequency medicine, where I've learned all of my knowledge, honestly, because I put everything to the test and see, okay, what is the nervous system telling me on my patients or my population of patients? Well, if terrain theory was all 100% correct, then I wouldn't be finding so much parasites and bacteria and fungus and viruses that the body is saying is a priority to treat. So now you have germ theory, which is that pathogens make us sick, and that's all it is. And now, yes, there's a lot of corruption when that became a thing with pharmaceutical industry and all that type of stuff, right? A pill for an ill, and I don't think that that's exactly how we have to go one way or the other. I think we need to combine them. I think we need to get the toxins out of us, get our terrain proper. That makes it easier to fight off infections. But if there is a crazy amount of mold or parasites or viruses in the system, the body, the saying is that the body needs no help, just no interference. But I have found clinically that there's herbs from the environment, from our nature, that help us get over the infections faster. And so that's where you should see me talking about herbs all the time and all that type of stuff. So I'm really a mixed bag when it comes to terrain versus germ. I am like right in the middle and utilize both.
It really does when you think about it. It's logical. And I mean, the world we live in today, we're being faced with more and more toxins in our environment more than ever before. And our body we're like in this moment of evolution where our body is trying to adapt to this new environment that we haven't seen before. Our bodies, historically haven't come across microplastics and all sorts of different toxins, especially not at the rate it is today.
Totally.
And you can see how it correlates with things like the rise in autoimmune conditions. And so I would love to hear kind of your thoughts on autoimmunity and how that's coming about and where it comes from. Because I think that it is still so new that different people, different doctors you talk to have their own thoughts and theories on why it's happening.
Yeah. And so one thing I will say is that when it comes to docs, whether it's functional docs, Western docs, whatever it is, they'll usually harp on one or two things that cause like autoimmunity. They're like, oh no, it's all, vaccines, or it's all glyphosate. And they're not wrong, but there's way more than just that's going on essentially, And so, my big thing with autoimmune is that the body is not making a mistake, because that's what, you go on Google and all the main, Mayo Clinic, everything will say that for unknown causes, your body's attacking itself. And really, the immune system is doing what it's designed to do. It's designed to protect us, but there's toxins in us that the immune system's going after that are lodged onto our tissues. We've been talking about microplastics. What that does is that attaches to albumin in our blood, right? Our the main blood protein, and it changes the structure of our body proteins, our amino acid sequences. And so now the immune system's like, hey, that's not proper. Let's get rid of that. And now our tissues that have almost a similar amino acid sequence are getting caught in the crossfire. And now you have Hashimoto's, now you have lupus, now you have RA or whatever it is. And it manifests different in everybody from that perspective of like what autoimmune you get, because we're all biochemical individuals. Like someone with RA, rheumatoid arthritis, probably has a lot more unresolved deep resentment and anger in their life than someone who has Hashimoto's that might not be speaking their truth and shutting down their throat chakras and thyroid and things like that. And so that in a nutshell is what autoimmune is to me, what I've found. I used to say that my patients will laugh at this one, all my autoimmune patients. I used to tell people that it's not a disease, it's a reaction. You just need to get the reaction out of your system. Now, what started happening was when these patients started going into remission, then they started going back to the lifestyle that created the problem. And then I switched and said, no, you know what? You do have an autoimmune disease, because now they're more likely not to go back to what created it in the first place. And so I've had to reverse my verbiage on that, because people were like, oh yeah, I'm all good now. My antibodies for this, now they're this. My T regulatory cells are good now. Blood work's normalizing. I feel much better. And now I'm going to go back to drinking Diet Cokes and, eating drive-through food. And it's just, you with autoimmune, you have to be extra cautious with the decisions you make on a day-to-day basis.
And I have two questions on this.
Yeah.
One, are autoimmune conditions hereditary? Are they passed down to different generations? And two, from your experience, I mean, you have a large patient base. Are they reversible, curable from what you've seen?
So your first question, are they hereditary? So I think everything comes down through genetics, but then it's epigenetics that rule it all. So for instance, I'll use my mom as an example. She went her whole life, she's in her 50s now, her whole life with an undiagnosed Hashimoto's. And so
I think my mom too, she's been on thyroid medication for a lot of years. And I'm like, have you ever tested for antibodies?
Yep.
Never. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big deal because right, it's like the most common autoimmune. You can argue diabetes too, but Hashimoto's is like the number one autoimmune that is misdiagnosed for sure. But my mom wasn't even put on thyroid anything. She was had some reproductive issues and migraines and all that type of stuff. And then, years later, when I started learning about this stuff, I'm like, you should probably do a thyroid panel and do the antibodies. And sure enough, antibodies were, over 100. And so my point to this is it might be in my genetics, but I don't have Hashimoto's. I have lived a different lifestyle, and lifestyle turns on and off your genes essentially. And so, yes, there's some people are going to say it's solely genetic. Some people say it's solely epigenetic. I say, it definitely, you inherit genes, but you're the one who turns them on and off essentially. And so the analogy is your genes are like a loaded gun. There's a process called methylation, which is a big buzzword, right? MTHFR that everyone knows about now. That methylation is what turns on and off your genes. So that's like taking the safety off the gun. And then the environmental toxin and whatever poor lifestyle choice is the thing that pulls the trigger to the gun, which then allows your genes to express themselves either properly or not so good. And then you have an autoimmune. And then the next one was, have I seen it cured? So I've seen people go to zero antibodies. I've seen people do certain blood tests that go over the autoimmune destruction of different tissues. You can check, is it spread from thyroid to ovaries or gut or brain? And I've seen people reverse that. Now, it's getting much, much harder than even 10 years ago when I started practice to achieve that because of where our society has come from toxins and the environmental toxins like the air pollution, the plastics we've been talking about, the metals. And that's not to scare people. Again, perception of knowledge. Know that it exists, but be grateful that you also have tools to combat it. And so that's what I'll say about that. Similar to how I used to say, oh yeah, autoimmune is, no more. It's not a disease, it's a reaction. And then people started putting themselves back into it. So I'm like, oh, it's an autoimmune disease and it's in remission.
Let's talk about parasites.
Okay.
Because I feel like some of the things you talk about, I actually recently just found out I had a parasite and I kind of knew it. And some of the things you talk about, the symptoms occurring around the full moon, just like I think are really helpful. But can you talk about like what are parasites? What do they where do they live? What do they infect? How can you know if you have one? Does frequency medicine help you know if you have one?
Yeah. So to keep it simple, which is something I keep saying in a nutshell, or keep it simple. And so parasites, you can look at as like a bacteria. Right? They're little critters. They can be worms. They can be little, what we call protozoa or flukes, which are tiny little parasites that live in like your liver, your gallbladder, your pancreas, anywhere where there's ducts in your system. And they are just like these little brilliant pathogens is what I'll say, because they're so good at really surviving. in general, like what are parasites trying to do? They're trying to survive. They need a host. Right? And whether that host is human or animals or reptiles, whatever it is. And so what they'll do is they will feed off you. They'll rip your nutrients out, right? They survive on nutrients. And this goes back to toxicity creates deficiency. And I will say that parasites give you the most wonky symptoms of any type of infection. They secrete ammonia, which is, other things do too. Lyme does and bacteria. But one of the things is they'll give off is ammonia, and ammonia will deplete your butyrate, which is your main cell of your colon fuel. So butyrate heals leaky gut, another buzzword that people love to throw around. It's also known as a short chain fatty acid. It also depletes your GABA. And this is where a lot of the symptoms come from, because GABA is our main inhibitory neurotransmitter that keeps you calm and restful. And so when you have no GABA, you don't sleep. What do all pharmaceutical sleep medications work on? GABA receptors. And so when you don't have GABA, you don't sleep. Your mind doesn't shut down. That's a huge one with low GABA, is you're thinking 1,000 thoughts a minute. If you lie in bed at night and your mind starts racing, you are low GABA, for sure. And things like ammonia, instead of supplementing GABA, maybe it's too much ammonia in your system caused by a parasite. This is back to like what we kind of started talking about. And when you have low GABA, not only that, but the more intense cases of this, low GABA is seizures. And when I've had patients who have had seizures, in 100% of them have I found parasites, 100% of the time. Parasites and pesticides, that's what I always say about seizure activity, whether it's epilepsy, whether it's febrile seizures, whatever type of seizure it is. That's a really big one. Another big one with parasites is anemia, because they love to eat your iron.
Yeah, that's what I had. I had really low iron.
Was that why you thought that you had it, or did you have other symptoms?
I had other symptoms, but it was also just like this gut feeling. Like I knew something was off. And also maybe I was just watching a lot of your content. And it gave me that gut feeling. But I could just tell something was off. I also had been traveling to Central America a lot. And
cool. Well, I'm sure that was fun.
Yeah, it was worth it. I'll do it again. But
it's worth the parasite. It's worth the parasite.
Yeah. Well, especially like back to our original point, when you feel like you have a toolkit, it's not that scary. Like I found out, and I just went on like the black walnut oil tincture, and what's the other one? The Scularia. Yeah. And I think it really helped. I don't know.
Yeah. And so, like to your point right there, is you went to you said South America, right?
Central America.
And so going to all these places, like they have different water sources. This is where people go to Mexico and get Montezuma's Revenge. These are bacteria and parasites that you pick up in different ecosystems, right? Every country, is a different part of the world, different ecosystems that your microbiome is probably not used to. They call it, I've never been, but Bali belly is what they call it when you go to Bali. Like this is what you're being exposed to, and it's causing you symptoms. But I always say, don't get it twisted. You don't have to travel far to have a parasite, right? Your dog or cat could have parasites and they'd love to lick you. That can be a very big exposure of parasites. Public swimming pools, spouses. I mean, you can get flukes from swimming in lakes, from being in dirt and gardening. There's flukes in, all these places have ecosystems. So just like us, we have all our bacteria and fungus, and we have our own good parasites. The environment also has its own ecosystem with other parasites that can be toxic as well and get into our system. So
this is also like the idea of terrain theory, though, right? Is like we are constantly exposed.
Yes.
So you are never going to be anywhere on the planet where you are not exposed. So what, to your point, Dr. Charlie, like what can you control? Yep. You can control your terrain. So I feel like terrain theory, like it doesn't mean germ theory doesn't exist, but like if we focus on terrain theory for a minute, it's the focus on what can we do to have the best terrain possible as we go and swim in lakes and travel around.
100%. And I will say that germ theory was just ran on for money purposes. And I think if more people knew about terrain theory, we would be healthier as a society. But to your point again, is like just because you believe in terrain theory and you know that it's true doesn't mean that now it just totally discredits all of germ theory.
Right. So what do you typically tell people who think they might have a parasite? And do you tell, I would imagine like most people must have some parasitic infection at some point in their life. Do you think that a yearly, twice a year, 3 times a year parasitic kind of herbal cleanse is something you suggest?
Yeah. So I like, without muscle testing people and frequency testing, I would say like seasonally, twice a year, I would probably go and do like a 30-day, just some herbs. And you guys know that I really like Supreme Nutrition. They're single herbs. They're not, there's definitely products out there that have 20 herbs in one supplement, probably a little too strong in my opinion. because in nature, there's Mother Nature's ratios. And so I like whole herbs more than extracts. And to use one or two of them, like you're literally going to the bush and eating the herb, more than products that have 30 anti-parasitic herbs in them. So I think twice a year is probably, a good idea of, 3-4 weeks. If you've never done it before, it's probably going to take 3 to 4 months, I would say, to really like help the gut. It takes time. It's, not like an antibiotic where in 10 days, you just nuked your whole gut. Like, these are plants. They're not as potent as antibiotics, and they're a lot safer, and you can use them for an extended period of time.
And are they safer for your good bugs as well?
Yes. Yeah, they're more selective towards toxic pathogens, and there's a lot of research on that too, of how it doesn't just nuke the gut like an antibiotic does. And I'm not saying there's no place for antibiotics, obviously. If you have something that needs to be gotten rid of in 24 hours, or else you're going to be in really bad shape, like there's your medical miracle. But, we've obviously, I'm sure you guys have talked about that. We just relied on pharmaceuticals in cases of non-emergency that, again, has wrecked our gut floras and now set our terrain up, right? It set us up for a toxic terrain, and now we can't fight off pathogens from the environment.
Yeah. And one thing that you said in your autoimmune video in your membership, this is something that I'd been thinking about before, and then I heard you say it too, and which is alcohol is an antibiotic. Mm-hmm. And I just had dinner this past weekend with a couple, and the woman was like, I didn't want the sugar that comes with alcohol, so I just ordered this gigantic martini. Yep. And I'm like, well, first, alcohol makes your blood sugar go down. My son has type 1 diabetes, so I, really have did a deep dive into blood sugar, and I think that's one thing that surprises people is that alcohol makes your blood sugar go down. But that I said, alcohol is like an antibiotic. Look at what's inside your hand sanitizer. It's right. The main ingredient is alcohol. And as a society, we've just been, drinking alcohol thinking that maybe it's just bad for your liver, but it's very disruptive to the gut microbiome.
Absolutely, 100%. 100%. And, some people will only talk about, you got to be off alcohol if you're doing if you have too much fungus or yeast in you, but, it kills bacteria as well. It kills good gut bacteria. And I don't really drink. I mean, I'll have some red wine here and there, celebratory, but I don't drink alcohol. And a lot of people will ask me, they'll be like, so you used to drink, why don't you drink anymore? And I said, hey, when I got into clinical practice, even before that, I just as I was learning it in school of muscle testing and frequency functional medicine, I just knew that doesn't seem like it's really, really good for us, obviously. But then when I got into practice, I just saw the people who would always drink, and it's like, oh no, I'm drinking red wine. It's healthy for me. It's like, oh, okay. When I started seeing that, I just knew that I didn't want to end up like patients who were sick, and so that's where I've kind of just cut it out, altogether. But yeah, definitely. It is, like you said, in hand sanitizers, the first ingredient, alcohol.
Can you talk about the SRT technology that you talked about? Like, what is it and how do people know if they need it?
So SRT is sympathetic resonance technology. It was developed by actually a musician. Obviously, they know a lot about frequencies and tonal frequencies. And then my biggest teacher, Dr. Versendahl, saw it and started working with the person who developed it. And to them, this is because it's a proprietary blend, right? Have all the patents and all that. It's 108 primal frequencies is how they say it. And so it's the frequency of the earth, the ocean, sand, grounding, mountains. It pretty much gets you back to groundedness. But it bombards your system full of these primal frequencies from nature that then it's kind of like, sympathetic resonance, a really good example of that, and I'm talking to two females right now, is women who live together usually menstruate together over time, right? That is sympathetic resonance. And so when you are wearing this technology or you put it in your field, your cells have no choice but to sympathetically resonate with primal frequencies. And I have seen absolute miracles with it, miracles. And so when you say, how can someone know if they would benefit from it? I would argue that everyone would benefit from it. If you feel better in nature, you'll benefit from it. Now, when you can frequency muscle test and you can put protocols together with it, that's when you start getting into the more intense use of it, where you're we call it infusing, put supplements on certain reflex points, like viral points or liver, and then you put the technology over the supplements. And if the supplements are in between what your body's grabbing on, it also grabs the frequency of the supplements. That gets into more of like the deep frequency medicine. And that's where, in California, when I was there and I was treating a ton of the vaccine injured community, these were the tools that help people get over a lot of what they would say would be incurable. I had a patient come in who had a herpes infection. This is one of my favorite stories that sticks out. Herpes infection on his eye, and he couldn't see out of his eye. And they said that the herpes infection scarred his eyeball. He was at the ophthalmologist, et cetera. And he came in, and I'm like, you just got gnarly viruses in your system. I put him on some herbs, and then he used some of the herbs over his eye and put the technology over it. And 3 weeks later, he came back into me and he said, so I did I think it was like 5 hours worth of that protocol. And he goes, and I was in Georgia at some golf thing, and I went to a friend's ophthalmologist, and they told me that I must have been misdiagnosed because there's no scar tissue in my eye. And so that was, one that always sticks out to me. And I have him on my original Instagram talking about his testimonial. But I mean, it's
That's
things
amazing.
like that. Yeah, it's things like that when you see it, you can't unsee it.
Yeah. And also, I think in this world of like the dogma of science, as someone, and I know I'm speaking to two people who are similar, I value the science, I value the literature, but also it doesn't mean it's the only thing that we can give as tools. And especially when we're talking about, in our world, food as a tool, eating more, foods and whole foods and vegetables and fruits and properly cooked legumes, et cetera, is almost always a good thing. And it's similar to what you're talking about, like the right herbal protocol, grounding, getting around the right frequencies. Like these are really non-dangerous protocols for most people. And so, yeah, I don't know. Sometimes I think when people hear this, when they're used to only listening to, not that I have anything against Huberman Labs, or et cetera, but it's like it's very kind of grounded in science only, when a lot of these technologies have been around for millennia. Like the whole food technology has been around longer than any of us, and humans at all. And, to your point, herbs and plants, like there is just this innate technology of nature that I think all of us are talking about tapping into and using for our benefit. And I don't know if we need dozens of, clinical trials to prove that eating whole foods is better than eating ultra processed.
Also, the thing about clinical trials is that it's isolating one thing when humans are just such dynamic beings and we all live such different lives. And if you're talking about emotional traumas that are stored in the body or hidden viruses, like how things come up within a trial, it's going to be different, and things might happen at different times in somebody's life. I think it's much more complicated than what you can put into a lab.
Yeah, I love that you guys are saying this because, I mean, everyone says the gold standard, right, is the research and the double-blind, placebo, et cetera, et cetera. I will tell you this straight up, that I have found better results with anecdotal stories and what is used anecdotally more than any of the research. And, one of my friends, Dr. Brad Campbell, always says that science is slow, logic is fast. And that's a great way of putting it, because it takes like 17 years on average for something to get published into scientific literature, essentially. And so are we going to wait 17 years to know that, olive leaf is really good at killing herpes viruses and parasites, and, it's great for blood pressure regulation, stuff like that? Or, just try it, and if it works, it worked. It's like, and it costs so much money to do studies too. So, if they can't patent something, which is things from nature, like an herb, then they're never going to put the millions of dollars, because they're never going to make the billions of dollars that they want to make on it.
Yeah. And like back to what I was saying, it's like if someone's going to do open heart surgery, like I want to see the trials and I want to see the studies and I want to understand that, like, when we use that more conventional lens. But when we're talking about what we're talking about today, which is kind of chronic care, lifestyle care, I think that's where logic can prevail when we're talking about these very potentially harmless interventions.
Yeah. One thing that came to mind for me while we were talking is something that Danielle and I have been talking about recently when it comes to frequencies, is that, you mentioned how water can hold a frequency.
Yep.
And one of our pillars of nutrition at Sakara is eat your water. Eat foods that are high in water content, over 90% water. And that essentially food can be a carrier for frequency. It is a carrier for frequency. Yep. And so it becomes really important to think about how your food is treated, the farming, the treatment, the preparation, all along the way, because it is a frequency carrier that you're putting into your body, just like a supplement or something else.
You nailed it on the head. That is totally true. And everything has a frequency, everything in life. Einstein and Nikola Tesla, said many things along the lines of frequency medicine and frequencies in general. If you want to understand, the universe and people, you got to understand frequencies. And that goes with our food supply and water and everything. It is what rules our universe.
One thing I forgot to ask you, Dr. Charlie, was homeopathy is a frequency medicine, essentially, too. Do you use it in your practice as well?
I use a little bit. I love homeopathy. I absolutely love it. I do too. And when someone has a lot of, like, we'll stay on parasites for an example, because we've been talking about it quite a bit. Sometimes people will have chronic parasites. And what I will find with frequency medicine is they have chronic people in their life that act as parasites to them. Right? Mm-hmm. And so with that comes a lot of emotional trauma. Well, the nice thing about homeopathy, and really what it's doing, is it's bringing an issue up to your neurological awareness, your nervous system's awareness. So it allows the body to heal itself at a faster rate. But what it also does, it gets into the emotional component simultaneously, which some people will say herbs can do. I think it's more so herbs that, if, say, it takes care of a root cause that was making you have anxiety, and then that kind of goes away, then that's kind of, an emotional correction too. But homeopathy gets to all the different dimensional aspects of healing, from a spiritual, emotional, chemical, physical component. Now, I use some. I am not great at homeopathy because I feel like there's so much
There's a lot to know. Yeah, there's a lot to know.
Much. It was like I wanted to do a diplomate in the British Institute of Homeopathy. And then I learned that, it's like a 4-hour intake, that if you walk down the street at 9 a.m. and the wind changes direction from east to west, now you just change your constitution.
Totally. It's
you know what I mean? So it was so much. I'm like, you know what? Why don't I just have people
go deep in one lane? Yeah.
Yeah. Or have them bring in homeopathics. I'll muscle test them to see what their body says. And I don't have to know, of 5 years ago, I knew that this remedy did this. And all of a sudden, some astrology changes. And all of a sudden this homeopathic constitutional remedy changed for, it's like, it's just too much.
It's intense. I see a homeopathic doctor who's in his mid-80s. Like, he's just been doing this his whole life, and you can see the ease with which, he knows which questions to ask, and I don't even know. Like, his brain he just must have so much information in that brain.
And like a traditional homeopath is so good at what they do that it's like, it is, like you said, he's in his 80s. It takes beyond learning from an institution to gather that amount of knowledge and experience. Like you don't just get that from studying a textbook.
Totally. Yeah.
And wait, so if you have a parasitic person in your life, and let's say it's not somebody you can get rid of, maybe it's your parent or something like that, can homeopathy help support you in healing, like so that you can continue to be in that relationship?
No, I think that it brings up to neurological awareness, and that your nervous system can help you get over it and help you adapt better back to like adaptation. I don't think homeopathy is the only thing that can do it. Obviously, I think like setting intentions, journaling, meditation, prayer, all that stuff, sets these boundaries that energetically can be very potent and powerful.
And support stress response, essentially. Yeah. Amazing.
Totally.
Well, thanks so much, Dr. Charlie, for your time. It's been an honor to have you on the podcast. We'd love to end with some light work. So some homework for all of our listeners to not help them boost their immune system.
Balance the immune system.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, to help them, keep their lights shining.
The biggest thing that I tell people, honestly, I find that the main stressor in people's lives is mental stress. I mean, it really, really is. If there was one thing that we can help everyone with, it's mental stress. And so instead of, thinking you have to do everything all at once, all I tell my patients to do is do something better than you did yesterday every single day. And in 30 days' time, see how much better you are off in your health, wellness, and just life in general. I think that is, it's so simple yet so profound.
I love that.
Do something better
it's amazing.
Today than you did yesterday, and just keep that pattern going. And people are amazed by how their lives change just from that simple little suggestion, so to speak.
Love it. Well, thanks, Dr. Charlie. Thanks for coming on.
Yeah,
thanks for having me.